the Hafez al-Assad began to move away from more of the Soviet model of direct state planning in all spheres of the economy, and kind of learned a little bit more from Khrushchev and a little bit more from the West to liberalize the economy, to start taking on IMF debt. But also, the British MI5 had been supporting and building up Islamists for a long time, since the 40s and 50s, really since the end of the Ottoman Empire, Lawrence of Arabia, the development of the Muslim Brotherhood. And so the Muslim Brotherhood in Syria, as early as the 70s, there was attempts by Hafez al-Assad to incorporate elements of them, to sort of buy them in, buy them off, to place an imam who is ostensibly a Sunni, even a radical Sunni cleric, even one who previously said anti-pan-Arab nationalist things, and get him to be kind of neutral and bestow his blessings on the government. And in turn, the government of Hafez al-Assad would then bestow some legitimacy upon the Muslim Brotherhood, because they were, of course, under the rules of the IMF, had to introduce these human rights organizations. And the Muslim Brotherhood in the 20th century, in particular since the 1950s, influenced by the Egyptian scholar Qutb, really evolved and developed the concept of introducing radical Islamism with social programs. So this put them in competition with the secular communist and socialist left, or the pan-Arab nationalists, who had kind of somewhat of a bandwidth with the pro-Soviet sphere. And how to incorporate this, the Muslim Brotherhood began to take up also kind of the language of the left, a little bit, in their own kind of social program way. So then they built up parallel institutions within society. So the IMF would say, for example, you have to put austerity, you have to put budget cuts on education. So then Assad's father had to, line item veto bills about education and healthcare and reduce the budget. Who filled the gap were these civil society organizations being financed by Gulf monarchs and the United States in a long game to create what are called dual power institutions. Vladimir Lenin, actually, the Bolshevik leader, was one of the first to write about the necessity in trying to overthrow a government ultimately, that you have to create dual power organs within the society. So you have to start to take away the credibility of the government while the government still stands by performing certain critical, necessary government functions, but through the philanthropic sphere. So the White Helmets really evolved out of these civil society organizations that the West and Gulf state monarchs had been financing going back to the 70s. And then, of course, when Wolfowitz and Pearl and the neocons and Bush II was president, and they made the war on Iraq and Afghanistan, then they put the ultimatum to Gaddafi, they put the ultimatum to Assad, now Bashar al-Assad, that you must let some of the even crazier radical Salafis out of jail. Let them integrate into these NGOs that were already Muslim Brotherhood-backed or Muslim Brotherhood-led NGOs that had been, for a certain period and in a certain limited way, kind of moderated or co-opted a bit by the state, but were festering slowly, building these dual functions in society. So then what we saw erupt finally, 7 years ago, is the culmination of a process going back to decades and decades ago.